Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through the noise to bring you the core insights you need to be truly well informed. Today, we're plunging into a chilling case that might very well be new to some of you, but it's a story that has captivated true crime enthusiasts for years. Joseph Naso, you might know him as Crazy Joe, or the double initial killer. This man was a serial rapist and murderer, and his decades-long spree, well, it might have remained completely unsolved if not for a truly unexpected, almost mundane turn of events. It's a powerful, disturbing narrative, and we're going to use it as our entry point.
And that's precisely why we're diving into his story. This deep dive will skillfully weave together two distinct yet critically important threads. First, we have the specific, gripping details of Joseph Naso's life and crimes, recently brought back into the spotlight by a new documentary. Second, we'll draw extensively from a critical academic review, a comprehensive meta-analysis, really, of studies on death row inmates that examines their broader characteristics. Our mission is to use Naso's unique, specific case as a, let's say, compelling lens, allowing us to explore the often surprising and complex realities of those awaiting execution in America.
Absolutely. Our goal today is to connect those vivid, specific details of a truly notorious killer with the general empirical findings about death row populations. Think of it as a shortcut, maybe, to understanding a very complex, often misunderstood corner of the criminal justice system. You'll uncover some genuinely surprising facts and will certainly challenge, a few common assumptions along the way. So let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. Joseph Naso's journey to being unmasked didn't begin with some brilliant detective work or a dramatic high-speed chase. No, it started with something incredibly ordinary, almost laughable, really, given the scale of his hidden depravity. In 2010, at the ripe old age of 76, Naso was arrested for parole violations. And the violation. Repeated petty shoplifting, he just kept doing it, even in his mid-70s. It was an unannounced home visit by his parole officer following these minor offenses that truly opened the door to his darker, decades-old secrets.
Yeah, that seemingly routine visit just to check in for a parole violation. It uncovered a literal treasure trove of evidence that changed everything. Authorities discovered a meticulously handwritten diary. The entries detailed rapes and sexual assaults, chillingly stretching back decades, all the way to the 1950s, an entire lifetime of hidden crimes. They also found disturbing photographs, images of women, some appearing dead or unconscious, bizarrely posed with mannequin parts and lingerie, just awful stuff, and perhaps most critically, a handwritten list of 10 suspected victims. This collection of evidence was absolutely key, to connecting him to long, cold cases that had haunted investigators for decades.
Wow. And those cold cases finally led to his confirmed victims, a stark reminder of his gruesome actions. There was 18-year-old Roxy Mrogash, her body found near Fairfax, California, back in 1977. Then Carmen Cullen, just 22, found in 1978 along the Carquinez Scenic Highway. Much later, in the 90s, came Pamela Parsons, 38, found in Yuba County in 93. And Tracy DeFoya, 31, also discovered in Yuba County in 1994. The media, based on that chilling pattern, they dubbed him the double initial killer because, well, all their first and last names began with the same letter, RRCCPPTT. These women were often found strangled, drugged, raped, and then brutally dumped naked in rural areas. It's also worth noting, I think, that some sources identified them as having been involved in sex work or struggling with addiction, which sadly might have made them more vulnerable targets.
It's an intriguing aspect of the case, definitely. How Naso's eventual arrest reignited interest in the infamous alphabet murders. Those happened way back in Rochester, New York. Naso himself was born and lived in Rochester for a time, and the similarities were, well, eerie. You had a victim named Carmen Cullen in both sets of cases, and of course that distinctive double initial pattern. So people wondered.
Right, was this the same guy?
Exactly. Many people thought maybe Naso was the long-sought killer from those earlier unsolved crimes. However, despite these strong coincidences, DNA evidence ultimately ruled Naso out for the Rochester cases.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, the DNA recovered from the scene just didn't match his. Plus, there was a significant age difference in the victims in life. The Rochester victims were young girls, 10 to 12 years old.
Whereas Naso's were adult.
Right, adult women. This distinction, supported by the forensic evidence, was crucial in untangling those threads.
His trial experience sounds, to put it mildly, quite unusual. Primarily because Naso chose to represent himself. Can you imagine? A man accused of such heinous crimes, standing up in court arguing his own case. His defense was, to say the least, unconventional, almost delusional, it sounds like. He claimed his photographs of nude women were simply art, his artistic expression.
Right.
And those graphic journal entries, which prosecutors rightly called a rape diary, he dismissed them as mere brain sex or just how guys talk. He emphatically denied they were confessions of violent acts. I can only begin to imagine the emotional toll on those jurors having to sit through that trial, seeing graphic images of victims, all while listening to this man's bizarre claims. It must have been profoundly disturbing.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the scope of Naso's crimes might actually be far wider than those 4 confirmed victims. Investigators strongly suspected other women were on his chilling list of 10. For instance, there's Sarah Dillon, born Renee Shapiro. She was a known Bob Dylan groupie whose skull was found in Nevada County.
Yeah.
And her passport, remarkably, was found tucked away in Naso's safe deposit box.
Wow.
Yeah. These compelling leads, along with claims from the new documentary we mentioned, suggest a much larger scope to his crimes. Potentially up to 26 victims. It highlights that even with a conviction, the full truth of a serial killer's actions can remain elusive for decades, with new information constantly emerging.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Now we're going to shift gears a bit. We're moving from the specific, chilling details of Joseph Naso's case and starting to compare his unique profile with the broader research on death row inmates. We'll be drawing directly from that comprehensive academic review we mentioned earlier. It's a chance to see how one individual story mirrors, or sometimes, diverges from these larger patterns.
Exactly. And what's quite illuminating is how Naso fits, or sometimes diverges from, the general demographic findings on death row. First, let's talk gender. The overwhelming majority of death row inmates are male, 98.5%. Naso, of course, fits this profile. It's a stark statistic, really, that underscores the gendered nature of capital crime. Second, the academic paper notes a disproportionate number of inmates from the South. Now, while Naso operated primarily in California, which actually has one of the largest death row populations, the overall trend in the research clearly leans geographically towards the southern states. The key insight here, I think, is that the application of capital punishment isn't uniform across the country. It's heavily influenced by geography and regional legal practices. It suggests systemic differences in how justice is meted out state by state. That's a critical takeaway.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about racial representation on death row? That's always such a contentious and important issue in discussions of the justice system.
It absolutely is, and it remains a significant point of controversy and scrutiny. The research shows that African Americans are markedly overrepresented on death row. They make up about 43% of inmates there, compared to only around 12% of the general U.S. population. Now, some argue that a more meaningful comparison is against their percentage of homicides committed. That's one perspective. However, it's crucial to state, impartially, what the review found. 96% of the studies they examined regarding the relationship between race and the death penalty revealed clear patterns of discrimination.
96%?
Yes. These patterns were consistently related to either the race of the victim or the race of the defendant, or sometimes both. It paints a very complex picture of systemic issues that go beyond just simple demographics.
That's a powerful statistic. So it's not just about demographics. When we look beyond those broad strokes to the individual characteristics of death row inmates, even more striking patterns emerge. For instance, what does the research tell us about intellectual and educational limitations among this population? It's striking to hear about Naso representing himself, which kind of implies a certain level of intellect maybe, but how common is that, really? What do studies reveal about the cognitive abilities of those on death row?
That's a crucial area, and what the research reveals is often quite sobering. Many death row inmates are, in fact, intellectually limited. One study, for example, found that 27% had IQs below 74.
Wow.
Which is generally considered the threshold for intellectual disability. Beyond just raw IQ, they're also often academically deficient. The median education level is around the 11th grade, but their functional literacy, what they can actually read and understand, is frequently much lower, sometimes closer to a 5th grade level.
Goodness.
So the profound takeaway here is that a substantial number of those facing execution may genuinely struggle with basic comprehension, let alone the complex legal stuff involved in their own cases. This raises serious ethical questions for the system, especially regarding issues like, competency to represent oneself. A Mississippi study highlighted this starkly. Inmates were found simply incapable of effectively representing themselves. Naso, in this regard, might indeed be an outlier, or perhaps his competency was severely undermined by other factors we don't fully see.
That's a staggering insight when you consider the stakes involved, life and death. And what about psychological disorders? You hear anecdotes about some of these individuals, descriptions that suggest severe mental health issues. Does the research actually back that up?
It absolutely does. The rates of psychological disorders on death row are incredibly high, far exceeding anything seen in the general population.
Mm-hmm.
Clinical studies have reported findings like 32% of inmates being delusional.
32%.
Yeah, and up to 60% reporting psychosis in some samples studied.
Ah.
Beyond that, there's pervasive depression and often very rapid, unpredictable mood swings, what's known clinically as mood lability. It paints a picture of a population grappling with severe mental health challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And this connects back to Naso directly. Remember those descriptions? His acquaintances called him paranoid, a bellicose drunk, a weirdo, even pure evil, that nickname, Crazy Joe. These descriptions, while anecdotal, align alarmingly well with the kind of psychological distress and dysfunction identified in broader death row populations in the research.
So it's not just about current psychological states, but also their histories. What does the research tell us about early life experiences or traumas that might contribute to this profile?
Yeah, that's another consistent finding. We see a commonality of histories involving significant neurological insult, basically. Brain injuries or damage, often alongside developmental trauma, severe family disruption, and importantly, substance abuse among death row inmates. While our sources provide limited direct information on Naso's specific childhood or any documented brain injuries, a comprehensive study focusing on juvenile offenders who ended up on death row pointed to multiple significant vulnerabilities in their backgrounds. It's a recurring theme. And on the substance abuse front, it's very prevalent. A sizable percentage of death row inmates have a history of substance abuse, or were actually intoxicated during their capital offense. In Naso's case, as you mentioned, he was known as a bellicose drunk, and many of his victims, sadly, were described as having problems with drugs and alcohol themselves. It suggests a deeply entrenched cycle of substance use in his orbit. And this brings us to a really critical point, one highlighted very clearly in the academic review. If the death penalty is fundamentally intended to punish those murderers who are deemed most morally culpable, the most blameworthy, well then a profound question arises. When capital punishment is applied to individuals who are clearly impaired or deficient or deeply disturbed in their psychological development and functioning, does it truly align with that original intent? The research strongly suggests there might be a significant miscarriage of that purpose. It really compels us to consider the profound complexities of moral responsibility in these cases.
Joseph Naso was ultimately sentenced to death in 2013. He became California's oldest death row inmate at 79 years old. It makes you wonder, given everything we've discussed about the profiles of these individuals, about the conditions he and others experience in this unique environment, what does the research tell us about life on death row?
The research consistently paints a picture of confinement on death row as generally characterized by, well, rigid security, intense isolation, extremely limited movement, and austere conditions. This isn't just a tough prison. It's designed to be uniquely restrictive, isolating.
Right.
Many inmates spend years, even decades, in this state, and it often leads to a significant psychological deterioration. We see studies reporting a pervasive sense of helplessness, a constant feeling of danger, profound emotional emptiness, and even a measurable decline in mental acuity over time. It's a very harsh existence, designed for those awaiting the ultimate punishment.
Given that harshness, here's a truly surprising finding from the research, something that might entirely challenge common assumptions. You'd expect, perhaps, that individuals on death row convicted of the most heinous crimes would be inherently violent within prison, but the data suggests the opposite. The majority of death row inmates do not exhibit violence in prison, even when they're in more open settings. That's genuinely counterintuitive for many people. What does that actually look like in practice?
It really is counterintuitive, isn't it? And it's a powerful finding that often surprises the public. For example, in Texas, a state with a very large death row population, only about 10.7% of death row inmates committed assaults over a 15-year period studied. That's quite low, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
In Missouri, they even tried an experiment, mainstreaming death row inmates into the general prison population. And the result was remarkable. It actually led to cost savings and improved inmate adjustment overall without any increase in violence.
Really?
Yeah. It really challenges the notion that these individuals are just a constant, unmanageable threat within a controlled environment.
So, if they're not typically violent within the prison system, why do you think that is? What are the hypotheses for this, well, unexpected behavior?
There are a few key hypotheses that help explain this phenomenon. One is that the crimes for which these individuals were sentenced often occurred in specific contexts, maybe under particular conditions, or even at certain developmental stages in their lives that are simply not replicated in the structured, highly controlled prison environment. The triggers aren't there, perhaps. Another significant factor is the ongoing appeals process. Most inmates are pursuing legal challenges.
Hmm.
They have a very strong incentive for good behavior. Any misconduct could seriously negatively impact their legal petitions, jeopardizing their last chance at reprieve.
That makes sense.
And finally, the general prison incentives and consequences for behavior, which apply to all inmates, still apply on death row. There are still privileges to lose and punishments for infractions, which serve as powerful deterrents, just like for anyone else incarcerated.
That adds a lot of layers to our understanding of this population. It's not as simple as we might think. And bringing it back to Naso in the present day, we mentioned a new documentary earlier. Can you tell us more about how his story continues to unfold, even from death row?
Yes, absolutely. The Oxygen documentary, Death Row Confidential: Secrets of a Serial Killer, which premiered just recently on September 13, 2025, really brings Naso's story into current focus. It details how a fellow inmate, a man named William A. Noguera, became this unlikely conduit for new information. Noguera took, get this, 300 pages of notes about Naso's confessions.
300 pages.
Yeah, chilling details about over 20 unsolved murders that Naso allegedly admitted to him. And these aren't just, prison whispers. These confessions have actually led to new leads for investigators. And crucially, they provided an unexpected path towards closure for many families who've waited decades, literally decades, for answers about what happened to their loved ones.
That's incredible. So even from behind bars, the impact of these cases, the search for truth, continues.
Absolutely. It really highlights the incredible dedication of individuals like Noguera, the inmate, and investigator Ken Maines, who feature in the documentary. They persist in uncovering new victims and bringing answers to these cold cases even decades later. Their work speaks volumes about the ongoing, profound impact of these crimes on victims' families and communities. And it shows the relentless pursuit of justice that continues long after a conviction. It reminds us that for every case like this, there's often more beneath the surface, more questions to be answered and lives still deeply affected.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive today, we've journeyed through Joseph Naso's peculiar capture, his chilling confessions, his unusual self-represented defense in court. His story provides a truly powerful human narrative that, as we've explored, resonates deeply with and helps us understand the broader empirical findings about death row populations. It's a stark reminder, I think, that behind every statistic, every data point, there's a complex individual story.
Exactly. And as you reflect on these complexities and the insights we've shared today, consider this final provocative thought, drawn directly from the academic review itself. The continuing gaps in our understanding of death row inmates are, quote, perplexing in light of the professional, correctional, judicial, and public policy arenas that could benefit from empirical illumination. Oh, quote. In other words, there's so much we still don't know. So the question becomes, what more could we learn? And how could that deeper evidence-based clarity inform a more just, maybe even a more humane system if we truly commit to deeper, ongoing research into this unique and often profoundly troubled population? It's definitely a question worth pondering long after this conversation